There's a Wall Street Journal column about marriage as a mirror of human nature that says 40% of young adults say marriage has outlived its usefulness. What do you think's going on?
I mean, I'm not surprised, because these are young adults who've, like, I think in London now, and this would be true in lots of parts of the West, about half of kids will reach the age of 15 not living with their biological father. Half. So I guess these young people just look around and they're like, well, it's like evident to me that marriage isn't working.
Mary Eberstadt's got this idea about motherhood and family life as a mimetic desire, that the dearth of mothers and families causes fewer people to see them, which causes fewer people to want them, which causes fewer people to all the way
I think
down.
that's definitely true. And you can see that in data actually with, like, if your sister or your close friend has a baby, you're more likely to have a baby in the year or two following, and vice versa. So if the people around you are not having children, you're less likely to have children yourself. I think that's so interesting, because there's always been this assumption by demographers up until birth rates started really crashing in recent decades that people would just spontaneously decide, once they had access to contraception or whatever, to have 2.1 kids. That was like the natural settling point for the human species, that we'd all reach there and we'd just stay there. And that's clearly not true, because so many countries now are falling way below replacement. And I think it's because actually there's no law of nature that says that people should want 2.1 kids. People look around them and they're like, oh, okay, everyone here has 1 or 0 or 6. And then that becomes, as you say, the mimetic desire. I think that becomes what's considered normal. And humans are completely obsessed with what's normal, which is why I'm just generally quite skeptical of the idea of people having this, like, absolute agency or absolute. I mean, we do clearly have free will, but I think that what we consider to be desirable, normal, the life template, is so incredibly dependent on what other people around us think, which is, I think, exactly why we've got into this downward spiral in terms of fertility.
There's I love your analogy or your conception of prudishness and licentiousness, that we kind of flip-flop between the two.
Mm-hmm.
Which one do you think we're in now?
Licentiousness transitioning to prudishness.
Okay. Is this like the Perry-pilled equivalent of the hard men create strong times, weak men weak times, blah, blah, blah?
Loose women create. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think it's kind of natural to have, I think there's always a bit of a roller coaster within culture, because you reach a point where, you know, whatever particular excess becomes obvious. And then people start quietly thinking, hang on, I don't really like this. And then some people start saying loudly, I don't like this. And then, you know, everyone kind of joins in. You know, so on forever through history. What's different about this one, of course, is that we invented the pill. So previous periods of licentiousness, they didn't have the technological means to sort of go all the way with it. There
was a glass ceiling on how licentious you could be without incurring a ton of costs.
Yeah. Like, you always had some people, I mean, because it's women who, like, literally carry the consequences of sex outside marriage, right? There were always some women who, either because they had to, because they were in prostitution, because they were poor, or because they were like crazy aristocrats who just could be eccentric and get away with it, who would behave unusually. But most women in the middle, you know, having sex is probably the most consequential thing a woman can do without contraception. So most women would take that decision very, very seriously for obvious reasons, up until the 60s. And then it's all out the window. And we can't uninvent that. Like, the pill is not going to get uninvented. Even if all these, I mean, there is a little bit of a reaction of the kind of, what I think of as the goop class, right? like women who are really into wellness.
The goop class.
Yeah, like really into
goop.
Gwyneth Paltrow. Yeah.
Why is Goop. What's she got to do with Goop? What's that?
Because there's this recognition, which I think is true, that hormonal birth control is bad for you, basically. And so there's it's not coming from traditional Catholics or anything like that. It's coming from women who are, I think, justifiably concerned about the health effects, who are doing things like fertility tracking rather than hormonal birth control. Like, that's happening, but I don't think that heralds a mass sort of rejection of the pill.
Okay, dig into the Goop class for me then. What are they doing?
So, like, natural cycles, for instance, if you heard of this.
I have, yeah. Sarah Hill did talked about a great study that was done to do with attraction to the partner when you were got together on the pill versus off the pill, etc., etc.
Yeah, I know. Okay, so two things. I know quite a lot of women who've abandoned hormonal birth control and have ended up doing whatever kind of more like wellness maximizing means of fertility. You can also do things like tracking making your exercise regime gel with your menstrual cycle and things like that. Yeah, so there's a whole wealth of like technology enabled reproductive wellness available, which is good. I have nothing against it. I also know so many women who've got pregnant from doing that accidentally.
What, from their exercise routine?
No, got pregnant. It doesn't work that well. Like, realistically.
Natural cycles is thermometer under the tongue, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's like a more sophisticated version of just tracking that Catholics have done forever. But like, there's quite a good chance.
Who knew it was just Catholic technology all over again? Okay, so prudishness to licentiousness, and you think that we're sort of tumbling just over the top of that super sex positive into what's coming next? I think that
I think the reason my book did unexpectedly well is because, yes, we're at that tipping point where everyone's been privately, well, not everyone, but a lot of people have been privately thinking this is weird. And then someone starts saying it and you're like, yeah, this is weird. I think that's probably the point that we're at. The only thing is, though, I don't know if it's going to be as radical a period of prudishness as we've seen historically, because we've got the pill, one, right? So that's like a completely different material situation. And two, because we've got the internet, we've got porn. Like, is that really going to be... My suspicion is probably what we'll see elites reacting against the licentious period. We'll see, the goop class, but also the male equivalent, that impulse control is such an important element of living in our kind of technological landscape. Like, if you can't put down your phone, you're never going to do well professionally. Do anything. Yeah. So the people who are best able to resist all of the various temptations, including sexual temptations, of our new material conditions, are the people who are most likely to find themselves in the elites.
Tell you what's interesting, conscientiousness is moderately heritable, like all psychological dispositions, and yet what you're saying here is that the people who are going to best be able to control their reproduction are the people who are high in conscientiousness, which means that you're going to select for people low in conscientiousness who are going to be having more kids on average.
Yes.
This is the future. Talking about the decline of birth rates. All of the people who are anti-natalist or anti-children or family creation, but also from the left, need to read one book on behavioral genetics to realize that if you want your particular philosophical ideology, political ideology to keep going, in the space of 100 years, it's just going to be Ashkenazi Jews and Mormons and you guys are going to be, because again, political ideology is like 60% heritable.
I agree with you. And people have been worrying about this for like 150 years. It's just that like, you're familiar with Francis Galton, who's the father of eugenics. He was like, as far as I'm aware, I mean, this was before they even knew what a gene was. He was the first person to sit down and draw up family trees and realize that what he called genius was heritable. And
wasn't it hereditary genius? Was that not his first thing?
That sounds right.
Yeah.
And so particular families were particularly likely to generate these, prominent figures. And obviously the sort of methodology he was using now seems really archaic, and how do you measure genius or whatever. But he was basically right. He was basically recognised that all of these things were just, basically every psychological trait is heritable to some extent. And I mean, that's where the thing that people forget about the eugenics movement is that it was progressive. It was like self-consciously progressive. That's how people understood themselves. And it was often anti-religious. It was anti-conservative. It was seen as like this brave new scientific frontier that so many people were into. Like I've been reading about this at the moment for a piece I'm writing, and the popularity of eugenics in the early 20th century is like mind-boggling, and has mostly been memory hold.
Branding problem. Just needs a new branding problem.
Well, I mean, what they were talking about mostly, the eugenicists of the period, was using the state to either encourage some people to reproduce or discourage other people from reproducing. And there were some really, particularly in the States, the use of forced sterilization.
Did you come across that that particular lady who had, I think it was, the statement was, 3 generations of idiots are enough. Yeah, you saw that one.
Exactly. I can't remember her name, but that was like important case law in the States. And really a lot of people were sterilized during that quite brief period in America. Not so much in the UK, but of course it was the Nazis that just completely... It made that line of thinking completely unthinkable.
Branding problem, I'm telling you. So looking at this sort of licentiousness, prudishness paradigm, which I think is really important. I think it's nice. Anything that kind of has a flip-flop seems to be accurate to me, because it always swings back and forth.
Yeah.
I found this article that said, looking for nomance, study finds teens want less sex in their TV and movies. Have you come across this?
No, that's
very interesting. So younger generations don't think sex is necessary to the plots of most movies and TV shows. That's according to a recent study from UCLA. Researchers interviewed 1,500 individuals between the ages of 10 and 24 about the way that they're interacting with media. Those between the ages of 13 and 24 were asked if they thought sex was needed for the plot in entertainment, and 47.5% of respondents said it was not. They also said they wanted to see less romance on screen, 44%, and more content centered around platonic friendships, 51.5%. In a video UCLA released in conjunction with the survey, 16-year-old respondent Anna said, "When there's media with too much sex in, me and my friends often feel uncomfortable." She later added, "I feel that it is way too graphic." The survey also quoted pop star Olivia Rodrigo's answer to the question of whether or not she watched the HBO series The Idol. "I don't have the desire to. I remember walking out of Barbie and being like, wow, it's so long since I've seen a movie that is female-centered in a way that isn't sexual or about her pain or her being traumatized." What do you make of that?
So is it just the girls who are reacting against it?
I'm not sure. Researchers say 1,500 individuals.
Okay.
No, it seems like it was both males and females that were saying that.
I've got 3 possible explanations come to mind. The first is it's the girls not liking porn culture. Fair enough. I think that it's not hard to find young women who've been raised in this, who had the internet access from the get-go, who absolutely hate porn culture, like hate what the boys are expecting from them, all of this. It might be that. It might be differential fertility rates already having an impact in terms of the conservatism and religiosity of young people. Because, like in America, for the first time in 60, 70 years, you've actually seen a decline in pro-LGBT attitudes among young people.
Wow. Where's that coming from?
Well, my guess is that it's coming from the fact that basically since the pill, more conservative, more religious people having kids, yeah. And then that's already starting to play out in terms of the younger generations being more religious and conservative.
We're seeing that male-female liberal conservative divide amongst kids as well, though, right?
Yeah.
So presumably if you split that polling down, but it seems like everybody's shifting a little bit further right.
That's plausible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, and what was the third one?
Like xenoestrogens. It's possible, isn't it?
Everything, all roads lead back to Alex Jones, ultimately.
I mean, he was sort of onto something, wasn't he? I mean, that it is possible that the sex recession, so-called, is partly hormonal. It's partly caused by, it might partly be caused by women being on hormonal birth control, which is changing their sexuality might also be caused by men being lower T.
So the low testosterone for men, do you want to hear my real horseshoe theory for this?
Okay.
Right. So I learned this whilst talking to Dr. Sarah Hill, who wrote This Is Your Brain on Birth Control, right? And she taught me that male testosterone levels are mediated by the fertility of the women in their local ecology. So if you were a male in their 20s, but you happen to be around a bunch of other men or a bunch of other grandmothers, perhaps, or a bunch of children, your testosterone levels drop.
Interesting.
And what you have are women who are very highly artificially suppressing their fertility. So men are able to smell the t-shirt of a woman and be able to pick the one that they're most attracted to is the one who is currently at that stage of her cycle. She's currently fertile, etc., etc. They can see, they've done studies where men watch women's silhouettes walking, and the women who are currently during their 7-day you can get me pregnant period, they're the ones that they're most attracted to. The fucking silhouette of the way they walk displays their
high heels replicate that. That's the idea. The high heels make you walk in that distinctive
jiggle
way,
in that way.
That make you look
so
like
you have this
ovulating.
recursive feedback loop of hormonal birth control causes women to select for men who are more providers rather than protectors. They want provisioners, right? They want the academic and the resources more agreeable. They then either come off or don't come off birth control, but find that they come out of this fucking hormonal fugue state. Oh my God, who am I in a relationship with? But you also have this effect on men too, not only socially I noticed that lots of women seem to be attracted to Timothy Chalamet, who's painting his nails and kind of blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But the genuine physiological hormonal response to men just being around lots of women who are on hormonal birth control. Now, processed foods, not enough time outside, not enough time with vitamin D, not enough time with friends, but there's a big X factor apparently amongst testosterone researchers who don't know why men's T levels have dropped the amount that they have, right? It's about 1% a year, every year since, I think, 1950.
Wow.
So it's like, and then that goes to 100 and then it's that again and it goes to 100. So it's not how we're in minus fucking testosterone soon. But yeah, so hormonal birth control has a lot to answer for, I think.
It's a really tricky trade-off, isn't it? Because like there are clear downsides to having a bunch of low T men, you know, in terms of fertility, in terms of men and women just fancying each other and like having functional relationships. But also like high testosterone is also associated with crime and violence.
Yeah.
So which, you know, do we choose to have a society of kind of sexless, incredibly like online,
placid soy people?
Yeah, who also are quite chill.
Yeah.
Don't cause like enormous problems. I don't know. That's like a genuinely hard thing to choose.
Yeah, you could almost look at it kind of like disposition sterilization.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fuck. Yeah, but
then we had problems with like this is a real problem with the military. I'm sure you know, like massive recruitment problems.
I thought that was because everyone's fat and got diabetes.
Well, that too.
Right.
But also not being interested in it.
Men just don't want to wage war.
Yeah.
We can do it from Modern Warfare or I'm on Reddit.
It's probably also partly to do with lack of like faith in the nation, like being less patriotic in general. Like the pool of potentially great soldiers just gets smaller every year. And it's sort of fine, I guess, we get away with it because if we're not actually in a hot war and if we have loads of technology. But you can imagine a scenario where that becomes an enormous problem. Like a mass mobilization. I don't know how we'd actually fare.
The Chinese government banned K-pop. Do you see this? Because they didn't want, what was it they called them? It was like sissy men. We don't want any more sissy men.
Yeah.
So it was all of the Chinese male role models were like super high T jacked dudes. And they didn't want this BTS like soy like culture infecting them. That's what they saw it as. Something
I learned about that from I had a Rana Mitter, who's a professor of Chinese history and politics at Oxford, on my podcast. I didn't know this. In China, there's a very strong association between communism and masculinity. And actually, it's the old pre-communist, like Confucian soy boys, basically, you know, the sort of like intellectual, indoorsy that's associated with pre-communist China. And so some of the reaction against feminization through K-pop or whatever is associated with anti-communist feeling.
So this sort of Gen Z pushback against romance, this is what I thought was super interesting, right? So we've got your spectrum of prudishness and licentiousness, but it's not just the short-termism of physical desires being satisfied. There's also another level to this, which is to do with romance and how central your connection to another person, a significant other, is, right? Because that kind of fits on the prudishness, licentiousness scale, but it's also not exactly the same. Like that would be something that's slightly different. Like how important is it that you find a significant other? And I think that at least a little bit of that UCLA study probably is Rachel Ziegler as the new Snow White saying, we don't need a prince to come and save her. She didn't have a prince. She had a stalker. A sleeping beauty can't consent. I wonder if it's not just a pushback against the sex side of stuff, but the nomance, right? Just against romance culture in general. HSBC got Emily Ratajkowski, the tennis player, to come and do Fairer Tales, princesses doing it for themselves, which was a rewriting of Cinderella, Rapunzel, and Snow White, where instead of waiting for a prince, the princesses went and started their own businesses on their own and invested their money wisely. So I think because HSBC is really where we go for like modern fucking dating culture. So yeah, I just think that this Gen Z pushback against what may on the surface appear to be about sex may actually run deeper.
The thing is that they're sort of right. The sort of a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle old line, or the line from Gloria Steinem I always thought was really clever, which is we became the men we once wanted to marry. I.e. second wave feminists were able to do that. And I mean, I always think this about the sort of the disposability of men in modern culture, which is totally real. You know, that basic red pill position is true. There is this problem of men basically not having purpose, not feeling needed, whatever. Women not feeling as if they need husbands because like they kind of don't, you know, if they're not having children, or even if they do have children, you know, they can participate. Like it turns out that actually women being slightly more conscientious than men are, for instance, and slightly more agreeable than men are, is actually really great in a sort of laptop job economy.
Brain-based instead of brawn-based.
Yeah, like women are actually slightly better. Not at the tech, you know, you've still got overwhelmingly male CEOs and things like that, but in the kind of the median range, women are actually kind of better employees in service economies. You know, the problem that men are facing is not actually feminism as such, although feminism has kind of accelerated some of these phenomena. It's basically technology and affluence. In highly technologically sophisticated and affluent societies, men who are not in this incredibly, you know, far right tail, super successful, intelligent, whatever, just normal men have less to do. We don't need brawn. Like when we invented the internal combustion engine, the importance of male muscle power dropped like a stone.
Diminished.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then as soon as you had equality in terms of access to education and employment, and you pivoted already from that brawn-based to brain-based economy, it turns out that women have a kind of a genetic unfair advantage with the current working environment, which meant that this is something that the manosphere, the red pill, never really gets right. Like when they talk about how women in the past and the culture that they applied to their dating made them happier, they forget the fact that women were largely financial prisoners of their partner because they had nowhere else to go. So yeah, maybe they were able to remain loyal and make better sandwiches, but how much of that was by choice and how much of that was Stockholm syndrome?
It's probably better. I think, well, so the big problem with the status quo right now, where we have, women are actually earning more than men are at most points along the income distribution, just not at the very top.
Yeah.
Like the gender pay gap is basically a result of the fact that you've got a handful of male CEOs who make an enormous sums, and they
you see that the current
wives.
PM of Iceland, the country, not the fucking company, is on strike along with all other Icelandic women at the moment over the gender pay gap.
Right.
Anyway, you were saying, along pretty much everywhere outside of Iceland and CEOs.
The gender pay gap is an artifact, one, of the fact that there are a small number of very, very high earning men, and two, of it's basically a maternity gap. It's actually just the fact that having children means that you can't operate in the workplace in the way that a man can. Like at the very least, when you're very pregnant and you've just given birth, But women are choosing not to do that, right? So if you don't have children and you are a sort of typical woman in terms of being slightly more conscientious, slightly more agreeable, having all of these, being more punctual, being a better employee, you do basically have more of an advantage in the workplace than another man. But this is completely unsustainable because of going back to the whole birth rates thing. Like any culture that just stops reproducing itself is not going to last. It's either going to just wither away and die, or it's going to be overtaken by some other culture. And I sort of think like the answer to the riddle of why every culture that we see on the historical record that has sustained itself and flourished has been patriarchal is possibly because a culture has to be patriarchal in order to reproduce itself. Like that's my black pill reading this stuff.
Dig into that.
Because it's very hard to have lots of kids as a woman. You can maybe have one or two just about and it not like affect your career. But there's just a straightforward clash between the labour market and reproduction for women that you can kind of get away with if you make enough money because you can pay for nannies and all this kind of stuff. But for most women, it's just like, they're almost irreconcilable. You have to trade off something. And what most women are choosing to do, it seems, is that they're having fewer children. Which for them personally might actually, the truth is like children are expensive and knackering. Like they are wonderful, but if you've not had them, you don't know how wonderful they are. Like once you've had your children, you just love them more than life itself. Like every mother I know says, I would unhesitatingly die for my children. But if you've never experienced that kind of love and it's kind of
abstract,
theoretical, then why wouldn't you say, actually, no, I'd rather make this next promotion?
Well, the modern culture prioritizes pleasure in the here and now and short-termism over everything else.
I think human beings just do that as well.
Yeah, but maybe there was, I don't know, maybe you're right, but it seems like there was definitely a preparedness to invest now for returns in the future more so. Our ability to, the marshmallow test was more effective 100 years ago for most.
I think because culture good culture serves the purpose of channeling making people more long-termist, because our natural inclination is to be short-termist, most of us. The thing is with having children is like you're short-termist because you want to have sex and then, oh, whoops, a baby came along. Like normally you don't have to think about that. Yeah,
that was evolution's big trick, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But now...
I thought you were just having fun. Guess what? The next 19 years of your life are locked off. Yeah.
And, there's a certain elegance to that, right? But we've lost that because of contraception. And now there are still groups, there are still cultures, there are still people who just love babies and will have loads of kids because they just get so much joy from babies, which is great. Like I'm one of those people. I would rather have loads of kids and earn less money. I've made that rational decision. But for a lot of people, that's not an obvious choice. Some cultures are still channeling people into being more traditionalist, being more long-termist. But the mainstream culture absolutely isn't doing that. And the very likely consequence of that is that, I can't remember the numbers exactly, but South Korea, you'll know, has the lowest fertility rate in the world.
For every 100 South Koreans, there will be 4 great-grandchildren.
Right. Like there's never been a plague that has knocked out that many people.
The 96% extinction rate over the next 100 years.
Incredible.
Of Koreans. Remembering that we shut down the entire world for something that kills 1 to 2% of people.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's the most incredible evolutionary bottleneck that we're going through.
In other news, this episode is brought to you by Cozy Earth. We sleep 1/3 of our lives. Do not spend 33% of your life in anything other than unbeatably comfortable sheets. Getting a good night's sleep is the ultimate game changer, and the sheets that you have are a massive determinant of just how comfortable you feel. Cozy Earth has the most premium bedding and loungewear that I've ever found. They're made from super soft viscose from highly sustainable bamboo, temperature regulating so you will sleep comfortably all year round, and an enhanced weave quality that won't pill. So it's higher quality, will last longer, and you will have a more comfortable night's sleep and wake up feeling more rested and revitalized. Plus, there is a 10-year warranty on all of their products. That's how confident they are that they're going to last. But don't just take my word for it. Oprah has chosen Cozy Earth as one of her favorite things for 5 years in a row now. You can get an exclusive 35% discount site-wide on everything by going to cozyearth.com/modernwisdom and using the code modernwisdom35 at checkout. cozyearth.com/modernwisdom and modernwisdom at checkout.
The interesting thing about declining birth rates is that it's not an existential risk in the traditional sense of permanent, unrecoverable collapse. It's not a classic version of it, but it's a population risk that's very unique in that there's no smoke in the sky, there's no asteroid heading toward Earth, there's no lead measure if you're looking until it's way too late.
Yeah.
Right? You don't feel it getting warmer. You don't even feel it getting quieter because we've got an aging population whilst a reducing birth rate, which means that you can have more people on the planet while fewer are being made. So you can almost predict out that.
So it feels really counterintuitive, yeah.
Yeah. Demography is destiny.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I definitely think that a big chunk of it is this prioritization of the here and now, of pleasure, of meaning. Did you see the girl with the list on TikTok?
No.
This needs to be, for the Perry pilled out there, this needs to be a part of it. This girl wrote a 350.8-page long list and printed them out on TikTok of all of the reasons why she didn't want to have kids. And these ranged from things like literally a parasite living inside of my body to can't wear cute heels anymore to unable to do brunch with the girls. And then she printed off like a one-page list of reasons to have kids. And now like hashtag girl with the list on TikTok's got millions and billions of plays.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, I guess she's kind of right. But the problem is that the thing you have to have on that reasons to have kids is like inexpressible joy. Which
most
to
meaningful
me,
experience of my life.
Yeah, which to me does cancel out like brunch with the girls. Also, you can bring your baby to brunch with the girls.
Look, and when it comes to heels, look at the shoes that you've got on today.
Indeed. I never wore heels anyway. Overrated.
Sparkly things. So, one of the promises, I had Mary Eberstadt on the show a couple of weeks ago, who's just phenomenal. I feel like she's your spirit animal. And she was talking to me about very similar sorts of things, that the promises that women were given previously, the freedom, the liberation. Ultimately, do you think that most women on average are more happy with modern sexual culture than they were previously, let's say 60 or 70 years ago?
I think no, but the outliers are quite striking. So there are some... The thing is that having the kind of, let's say like mildly patriarchal kind of structure where the assumption is that the men do participate most in public life and do the bulk of, well, I mean, it depends on what era you're talking about materially, right? So in subsistence cultures, women do actually do loads of economic work. They just do economic work that is compatible with also looking after little children. So like the man goes out in the field and collects raw materials and the woman processes the raw materials at home while minding the toddlers and like sharing the burden of childcare with her sisters and cousins or whatever. The more recent model of the breadwinner, where the man goes out and earns all the money and the woman stays at home and does all of the housework, is kind of historically unusual. It's not that bad. Like actually it's fine if and only if your husband isn't a tyrant. But But if your husband is a tyrant, it's completely disastrous. So it's like for most people, it's fine. For most women, it's fine, and probably is actually better than like the status quo where women have to still do disproportionate amounts of childcare and housework and do all of the, all the pregnancy, obviously, all the breastfeeding, obviously, plus going out to work, right? This is what feminists call the second shift, that you end up doing 2 jobs. That's, I think, worse, actually.
What was it that didn't you say you'd worked it out that you were doing a full-time job breastfeeding?
Yeah.
You were doing 40 hours a week of breastfeeding?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the third shift.
Yeah, exactly. Like crazy levels
breast-based shift
of crazy levels of work that you have to do, which is obviously, joyful, meaningful, etc. But it like there are only so many hours in the day. You need. It isn't feasible unless you have loads of money available to you or whatever. It isn't feasible to not have a husband, father who goes out and does all of that. And still be as good a mother as you want to be.
I'm so interested in paradoxes. Mary taught me about a ton of them. You have the pill, gets introduced, increase in single motherhood, increase in abortions, like paradox, interesting. Another one that I found from Candice Blake, who's over in Australia, is that gender inequality in the pay gap between men and women positively predicts both male and female satisfaction in relationships.
Yeah.
That the more unequal the earning opportunities are for men and women, skewed in the direction of men, not women, the happier both men and women are in their outcomes in relationships.
And stay-at-home dads is a really strong predictor of divorce.
Yeah, if the woman is the primary breadwinner, men are 50% more likely to use erectile dysfunction medication. Increases in domestic violence. The women are more likely to be on the receiving end of domestic violence if they're the primary breadwinner, because the male partner switches from a benefit affording to a cost inflicting mate retention strategy. If you begin to feel a disparity in mate value, you have 2 choices, right? You can either start to raise yourself up or try to drag the other person down, and making them fearful of you is a pretty good way to drag them down. But that's kind of dark. That being said, the patriarchy is so powerful that we've somehow convinced women that they both need to earn the money and that we can stay at home while they bear the burden of children. So maybe this is just a psyop from all of us to not have to do anything except for Xbox now.
What we've discovered. All right, so I don't really believe in. Okay, patriarchy clearly has like a strict anthropological meaning, in that societies where only men are allowed to be in positions of power and authority have traditionally been described as patriarchal by anthropologists. We don't live in one of those anymore. We haven't lived in one of those for half a century now. In this country, we've had like 3 female prime ministers and so forth, right? But I think that there's also a different way in which people use the word patriarchal, which still to some extent applies to contemporary culture, which is that there's this quite deep-seated feeling shared by both men and women, and I think cross-culturally, that masculine things are higher status than feminine things. And that's why you see this great eagerness, actually, of women, now that they can, to participate in like masculine coded things, to be...
What like?
Well, professional work, right? That there's been this rush of women into public life, into traditionally masculine roles. There has not been a rush of men into traditional feminine roles. Not at all.
Because there's no status associated with them.
Because there's no status associated with it. And I think often that's what feminists are describing when they talk about things being patriarchal. Like they recognise the fact that there's that kind of status gap. Remember
who's ascribing that. At least 50% of society is ascribing that like on their own behalf, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like this is what Richard Reeves's book was so interesting, where he talks about HEAL, right? What was it, like health education, maybe like administration or something else?
Yeah, feminine jobs.
Yeah, for more feminine jobs. There are 4 times more female fighter pilots in the US Air Force by percentage than there are male kindergarten teachers in America.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, because there just hasn't been this rush for men to try and attain feminine status, right? And I think that I don't think that our culture is misogynist, right? Like misogynists exist. There are some of them out there, but that's not typical. I think though that this sort of deep-seated assumption that women are, like, you're familiar with the women are wonderful bias?
Yes.
So this is the cognitive bias where people will tend to actually prefer to sort of show kindness and generosity to women over men in various scenarios. So like, you know, you see a stranger drowning, you're more likely to jump into the water and save them if they're female than if they're male.
But both men and women are more positively predisposed to news stories that complement women's outcomes, or say that a woman achieved something than say that a man achieved something.
Exactly.
And vice versa is true too.
Right. Which doesn't fit at all with the idea that we live in like a misogynist culture. I don't think that we hate women. I think though the way that women are sort of regarded, all else being equal, is as like your mum. Like, you love your mum.
You don't want to be her necessarily.
You don't necessarily respect her. I think that's the common way in which, like, I think that the puzzle basically as to why women are so consistently regarded in a particular way cross-culturally as being like lovable but also a bit like lower status is that women are considered to be kind of adjacent to children. So in the same way that we love children, but we're not going to let them vote. Right? I think that what the human brain does is it has this, like, it's like there's men, there's women, there's children. So women are in a kind of intermediary position and very often are basically have kind of childlike legal status.
Which is why I suppose it ties into something that I've been saying for a while. Modern women have been taught that true freedom is having sex like their brother and working like their father. That's the pinnacle.
Because it's this like clambering up, trying to attain that masculine status, which for some women, particularly women who have a more masculine temperament, you know, like some women are more disagreeable and competitive and not maternal. And those women have done well out of the changes we've seen since the sexual revolution, in that they can basically live, you know, live like their brothers now pretty much. Most women aren't like that though, and aren't made happier by trying to be more male.
Well, Chelsea Connerboy in the New York Times last year wrote that article, Maternal Instinct is a Myth That Men Created.
No, that's not true. Yeah, right. Like, yeah, you can go around sort of pretending that's true until you're blue in the face, but I just don't think it's true. It's
such a hydra-headed problem that we're talking about because it's the convergence of the denial of sex differences, this sort of tyranny of the minority, a selection for the most outspoken, gregarious amongst a group to focus on the outliers. It's not even tyranny of the minority as in some underspoken class that's speaking up for themselves, but also tyranny of the minority that appears to have outsized achievements like the male CEOs that's exactly what we've got going on here, that will skew data that people will focus on and use. January or February of this year is the highest percentage number of new female CEOs ever in America. It was 34% of CEOs in America were female new CEOs. You go like, that's insane. That's so that I would guess if you to actually poll from a nature predisposition perspective, that's over-indexing for it. Like, how many women actually want that life, that job? CEO sounds like a fantastic title, but what's the reality of CEO?
Appalling.
Right?
I would hate to
80-hour weeks,
that lifestyle.
Stress.
Yeah.
You know, it's horses for courses. And again, like, this is Peterson fucking 2018 stuff. You know what I mean? Right? Yeah. Like, how many times do we need to bang this drum? Evidently more, because it's not happening. One other thing I wanted to really dig into, what do you think the fallout of MeToo has been now, approaching 10 years hence?
I often hear from men that they are now more reluctant to go up to a woman in a bar or whatever. That there's this problem of fear of being falsely accused of something. And so I believe them, you know, if some men are experiencing that. I'm sure though what's gone on is that the men who were already sexually aggressive and likely to actually be, you know, Me Too perpetrators haven't changed their behavior at all. And the men who started being really careful were probably fine to begin with.
if you were a raper, the recent social media campaign probably, well, they've got a hashtag on Twitter, I'd better stop going around raping.
Yeah, which is, I mean, I wrote about in my first book, and it applies to this as to loads of things, the problem of normal distribution, where you have some trait which is arranged on a bell curve. And the problem is that if you apply some intervention, so whatever that is, like a social movement like MeToo or some policy change or whatever, probably what you want to do is you want to actually target one of the tails. You want to, you're like, oh, so we've got we've got a bell curve of sexual aggression, and there's this like most aggressive end who are causing no end of harm. What we want to do is make them stop. But it's you can't just apply an intervention to that point on the normal distribution. Like, it's going to shift in one way or another, and everyone is going to be affected.
You're smearing the entire group with the same solution.
So what you end up with is moving the threshold for being like reluctant to go up to a woman in a bar or whatever slightly, just to mean that like some of the nice guys are not doing it. Like, but that doesn't actually improve. It doesn't affect the rapists. And it doesn't improve women's experience of it. David
Buss's book, Bad Men, talks about it's one man doing 1,000 sexual assaults, not 1,000 men doing one sexual assault.
Yeah.
You know, it's repeat offenders over and over and over and over again. And unfortunately as well, repeat victims. There is something about the way that, again, this isn't victim blaming, but it is like something about the way that women hold themselves, where they showed this to, I think, maybe criminals in prison or assaulters or men that had assaulted people, and showed them a number of women walking, and they asked them to pick which one they would attack if they were going to, and they converged on the same women. So, you know, for all that we can say, you know, it's not about wearing the skirt, it shouldn't be about being in the dark alley at the wrong time, all the rest of it, like, correct. But there is something about particular women that causes predators to see them as viable prey. Does that excuse it? No. Does that, you know, is that them choosing it? Also no. But like, this is just the way that the world appears to be. Yeah. It's ruthless.
Yeah, and it drives me mad that we tell lies to girls all the time about this, because we're so desperate not to appear to be victim blaming, that we'll say, oh no, you can behave like a man, you can do whatever you want, go back to some random guy's house, it'll be fine. And then when it inevitably isn't fine, we're like, oh, well, you know, he shouldn't have been sexually aggressive. I was like, yes, obviously, but we don't, you know, I would love to just like delete every rapist from the world all at once. I can't do that. Like, if the advice that I'm going to be giving my daughters is going to be, unfortunately, different from the advice I'll give my sons.
What would be the advice that you'd give them?
It's like, for instance, don't go back to a random man's house that you've just met. Like, basic, okay? Like, consider it to be completely commonsensical up until even like the 1980s, you know. This is like recent stuff, but basically unsayable now, in feminist circles at least. Except everyone quietly says it, you know.
Well, again, it's the stated and revealed preferences thing. Like, how many parents that will proselytize about this on CNN and say that, you know, we shouldn't be telling women, oh, so you're saying that we should just accept the fact that men are going to do this. It shouldn't be that women should change their actions, men should change their behavior. Okay, what did you tell your 17-year-old daughter to do last weekend? Did you say, make sure that you text me when you get home, make sure that you're home before 11, etc.?
Don't get an unlicensed taxi, whatever. Yeah.
Stated and revealed preferences.
Yeah. And what drives me bananas is that there are some girls who don't actually have parents or friends or whoever who are privately telling them the truth. You know, all they hear is the public misdirection.
Oh, this is like the luxury beliefs of MeToo in a way.
Yeah. And so I feel as if actually we have a duty, people who are speaking publicly, to tell those girls the truth on the assumption that they're not going to hear it from anyone else.
It's the cultural surrogate mothers, in a way.
Yeah.
You've got this line between consensual and good, which I think relates to Me Too as well. What's that?
I think that a lot of there's a lot of things that came under the Me Too banner. Some of it was just unambiguously criminal, and, you know, Harvey Weinstein or whatever got sent to prison for criminal acts. A lot of what came up, though, a lot of the stories that got shared were things that weren't actually strictly criminal. It was just like bad behavior. It was behavior that actually in another era you probably would have been called ungentlemanly or something like that. But that vocabulary isn't available to a sort of contemporary feminist who's really bought into the sex positive message. And so they'll tend to just talk about things being consensual or not consensual. And actually the consensual, not consensual bar is like a low one. It's a legal bar. It's not actually a moral bar, really. Like there are a lot of things that a man can do on a first date or whatever that are legal but are bad. Plenty. But we don't really have the vocabulary to describe them, which is why I try and make, like the feminist case for chivalry. We shouldn't have got rid of that as a concept. Like when you have this as stark a physical difference and psychological differences between the sexes, 99% of men can kill 99% of women with their bare hands and not vice versa. We have to operate with that recognition. Chivalry in those circumstances is obviously in women's interests, even if occasionally it will mean feeling slightly patronised. Like, who cares? I'm so happy to have the door held open for me and my bags carried. It's completely fine.
If it means that someone's not going to assault me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is, I quote you and Mary about this all the time, that it is a straight line from you should hold the door open for a woman to you shouldn't beat your wife. It is one just continuous, women are worthy of protection and there is an asymmetry between what men and women can do. Yeah. And again, Rob Henderson's coming a couple of days later than you. It's like luxury beliefs all over again. Yeah. Like the women who come from societies where their husbands already knew that beating your wife would be a bad idea, or they had the support networks where that wouldn't be accepted, were trying to deconstruct a support structure that was needed for the underclass women whose husbands had grown up without a father and whose stepdad had beaten them, who just presumed that the way that you were supposed to be in a relationship was to hit your wife.
Yeah. I mean, I just, like, Chesterton's fence, like the wisdom of it. This idea from G.K. Chesterton, you come across a fence in a field, you don't know what it's there for. The progressive, the reformer, whatever vocabulary he uses, says, we don't need this fence, let's tear it down. Whereas the conservative says, no, let's find out what it's for. And then maybe we might tear it down if it turns out that it really isn't necessary. I mean, just the whole last 100 years has been like
Fences
non-stop vindication of Chesterton's fence principle. Yeah. And I honestly think that most of it actually is to do with technology. Like, much as I love to complain about my political enemies, like, actually the main thing that's changed for people has not been the intellectuals of the 1960s. It's been the dissolution of the family has as much to do with the pill as it does with anything any feminist has ever said. Like the real, I'm very sort of materialist in this sense. I think the real engine of history is technology. Or as Mary Harrington, our friend, likes to say, it's material reality plus memes.
Meme first, explain later. Me and Mary are on board with that. What was it that you told me the last time we spoke? The washing machine has done more to liberate women than any feminist ever did. That
was Phyllis Schlafly's observation. Like, Phyllis Schlafly is such an interesting figure because
Who is this person?
So she was the 60s. When would she have been born? She was at her height in like the 70s. And she was she was one of these really interesting women, American. Well, so she billed herself as like an American housewife, and I think she had 5 kids. But she also was like a foreign policy expert who'd worked in not Westminster, Washington, and had like incredible degree actually of professional expertise. But she always billed herself as like, a lowly housewife, whatever. And she led the campaign against the Equal Rights Amendment, which was a second wave feminist effort to basically enshrine in the US Constitution that men and women are equal and ought to have equal rights. And Schlafly said, in retrospect, not unreasonably, men and women aren't the same. And so actually, if you were to enshrine this in the Constitution, you would frequently end up with things with having to do things that are actually not in women's interests. So the example she liked to give, because this was during the Vietnam War, was, you want to see women drafted? Because that's where that ends up. If you say that men and women are the same, then why wouldn't you draft women? Why wouldn't you be sending pregnant women into combat? Men and women, men and women are the same, whatever. And second wave feminists used to say, because they were all anti-war, they say, well, we don't think anyone should be drafted. And I was like, okay. Okay, but if you're trying to like future-proof your constitution, which is, I think, very much the point of the constitution, that does seem to be And obviously, I mean, I don't completely agree with Schlafly. One of the things she used to do, which I find so cringe, is whenever she showed up at a public event, she used to thank her husband for allowing her to be there. I don't do that when I go to public events. So like she was of a different time in that sense. Okay, so I'm not going to hold Phyllis Schlafly up as like a feminist poster girl. Yeah. But she did, like, she had insights at the time on which she has been proven right. And the Equal Rights Amendment was never passed because of her efforts.
What do you think about this lack of approach at the moment? Alexander, one of my friends, Alex Statesike, put a study up recently. 50% of men aged 18 to 24 have never approached a woman in person in their life. And like even higher percentage, 18 to 30, haven't approached a woman in the last year. Is this downstream from MeToo?
I have a slightly weird take on this, which is that actually the thing you hear about as sort of the thing that Gen X people talk about of going up to someone in a bar and this being a way of striking up relationships, I think that was a very brief period of history, sort of post-sexual revolution but pre-internet, where that was considered normal. And I'm slightly too young to have ever actually experienced that. The normal way, actually, that people start relationships in the vast majority of cultures is to be like, it is like semi-arranged marriage, right? Like not the full, you've never met this person before, 13-year-olds, whatever, getting betrothed, like not like that, but the sort of you're introduced by family members, mutual friends, you're known in the community, you go to the same church, whatever it is, and then both of your families like consent to the marriage and it works out okay. But the expectation isn't like, the expectation of marriage up until relatively recently was that you would have an economic relationship, and a reproductive relationship, but you weren't best friends. And actually, I don't think husbands and wives used to talk to each other as much as they do now. I think people used to have much more homosocial kind of lives. You'd hang out with other men, you'd hang out with other women. You wouldn't necessarily hang out a lot with the opposite sex, including your spouse. So this idea that like the going up to a person in the bar is like the normal and natural way of starting relationships, I don't think is historically accurate.
That's interesting. So the male aversion felt fear of approach anxiety, which every guy listening is aware of, apart from the psychopaths, right? There is a girl that I find attractive that I either know or don't know or partly know or whatever.
Yeah.
Hi, how are you? Nice to meet you is kind of like a miniature war that you have to go to. And the felt sense of palpable fear is just ripping you apart inside. That isn't, or the modern aversion to that isn't some novel new problem. It was in your opinion here, a bar that kind of never really needed to be gotten over in the first place in some regards because you had seen each other at church for ages, or her father owned the farm next to your father's land and you guys had known blah, 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 like.
Yeah. People have much more kind of static social lives. So yeah, just approaching some stranger and ending up getting married to her is not.
I had this conversation with a guy called Mads Larsen, who is a mating ideology researcher. I'll send it to you. It's phenomenal. And he talks about this, all of the different arrangements that people went through, and the romantic to the confluent, which is what we've moved through most recently, has left us with a really interesting vestige, which is previously it was they own the farm next door. It was almost like a tactical marriage between the two of you. And then it's no. You guys are supposed to be together forever. There is supposed to be deeper meaning instantiated in this. But then as soon as you have the sexual revolution, you have confluence. So for as long as you can benefit me and I can benefit you, I think even Mia Khalifa, who obviously paragon of sexual virtue, said on a recent interview that people think that marriage is some sacred thing. It's not. It's just a piece of paper. And if this person isn't helping you grow, it's time to move on. So they just confluent ideology there.
Helping you grow.
Front and center. You need to be helping them grow. What does that mean? Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Helping you prepare for your next porn scene. I don't know, whatever she meant. So you have this really interesting thing, which is that both the two most recent cultures have kind of got like conceptual inertia inside of our heads that we have this sense, and we were kind of told, and maybe some people think that it's true, that you're supposed to find a person who fulfills you, who is your confidant, your best friend, your the sexual paramour, the co-owner of your children and the household and all the rest of the things.
Yeah.
And yet modern culture is this more confluence thing, which is they're supposed to benefit you and help you grow. And these two things kind of bounce off against each other. And then, you know, if we look back ancestrally at what we're predisposed for, it's fucking neither of those two, right? Like, you can say what you want about the truthfulness or utility of both of those. It wasn't that. And it seems like serial monogamy is what we're built for, some combination of polygyny and serial monogamy. And all of these, the existing base rate of what we are, plus the two most recent cultures, are just like the Bermuda Triangle of mating ideologies inside of our mind.
Yeah, there's this book called the All or Nothing Marriage, which is about sort of, yes, this modern conception of marriage, where exactly this, you put so much expectation on your spouse that they will be, you know, you will be perfectly sexually compatible, perfectly like conversationally compatible, you know, everything is perfect. And obviously for loads of people that isn't going to be true, and that's not going to be true for 60 years or whatever that you might be together. And so you end up with this all or nothing thing that, like, some people have absolutely fabulous marriages and some people just, they can't possibly take the strain, and so they collapse. And the authors compare it to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Well, like, if you're in a situation of economic subsistence, you basically just see your spouse as like your economic partner with whom you have children, but your expectations are not that high. And then you reach the point where you're so affluent, right, in contemporary culture, where you kind of regard marriage as, yes, as fulfilling all of these like esoteric psychological needs, which is just not reasonable. So I honestly, this again, Mary Harrington, endlessly quotable. She has this saying that we should abolish big romance.
Yeah.
That the idea of having these incredible like romantic expectations of your spouse is just pretty much setting yourself up to fail.
One woman meme machine, isn't she?
Yeah, she really is.
What was your thing? It was you that reminded me of a story that I'd forgotten from my childhood about ladies dropping handkerchiefs.
Oh, right. As a way of like demonstrating
interest.
Yeah.
So I had this thing with me and David Buss came up with this solution around women cultivating receptiveness if they want to improve their dating prospects.
Right.
Now, in a post-Me Too world where we're worried about women's safety, especially sexually, this is something that is kind of difficult to say. But again, if you want to work within the confines of how reality is, not how you want it to be, I think that women cultivating receptiveness accounts for the male approach anxiety problem, right? That, you know, a longer lingering eye than you think, or like, you know, smiling at somebody as opposed to doing the why men love bitches, treat him mean, keep him keen kind of approach.
Men are going to be so bad at receiving those signals though, don't you think? Have you ever heard that the average man of 130 IQ has the like emotional social receptivity of a woman with 70 IQ? Like the difference. This is why my husband.
So you're
and
saying
I,
that we're actually socially retarded?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My husband and I, like, my husband calls me a witch because I can like I'll be able to like sense there's something off.
You
with
are
this
particularly
person.
witchy today with the olive as well. Yeah, yeah.
I think it's just women. I think we are just witchy.
That's why you were burned at the stake.
You can just like sense that something, I don't know, facial expressions, whatever, something, which most men are just oblivious to.
Blinkers
with some exceptions, clearly.
Well, okay, so yeah, well, let's take that as the thermodynamics of the situation, that men are, their EQ is 50% of what a woman's is, essentially. Yeah. If that is the case, leaning in even further to not being receptive is going to make said blinkered man even less capable of understanding that maybe you're interested.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I just think that, again, another confluence of the Hydra's head of lots of stuff that's going on, the multifactorial problem. Women are maybe being a little bit more masculine, working in more masculine environments, thinking they need to be more disagreeable to be more effective at work, concerned about their own safety, generally skeptical of men that come up to them, strange men that come up to them in a bar, which has led to absolutely less receptivity from women. And it's like, look, if you are complaining, like, where are all of the good men at? look around a little bit if you can when you're at your CrossFit class or you're doing yoga or you're doing whatever. And if some guy comes up to you and asks some awkward, clunky question, but he's kind of cute, like, don't just presume that he's asking the question. Like, use the witch clairvoyance, right? Tap into the astral realm or whatever it is that you do, and think, oh,
yeah.
Have you heard of the male overperception and the female underperception bias?
Is this with sexual interest?
Correct. Yeah. So that's in David Buss's book, that men overestimate the degree of interest that women have to them and women underestimate, which is largely why you have awkward passes by male co-workers and stuff. Well, what do you mean? Like, her eyes, and you saw the way that she looked at me every time we went to the copy machine or whatever.
And you know, alcohol exaggerates that.
Does it really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So men are more likely to falsely perceive sexual interest when they're drunk.
Fantastic.
Which, again, it just makes so much sense of all the, you know, like, were you, you know, that there was like MeToo, but for schools in the UK a few years ago.
No.
It was called Everyone's Invited. It was like a website that some girls set up to describe like bad sexual experiences that they'd had with
in school?
Well, not normally in school. This was the thing. So it ended up being a big headache for teachers and head teachers, because parents were obviously really upset, understandably. And they said, you know, you should be teaching consent workshops in schools. You should be doing all these things. And the teachers were like, this isn't happening in school. Very rarely is this happening in school. This is normally happening Friday night at some house party. The parents aren't there. Everyone's drunk. And like, it's kind of the parents' responsibility, honestly, to stop that from
in.
Yeah, and it's like, look, you've got horny young men raised on porn plus alcohol. Young women often giving confusing signals. I mean, one of the things that like teenage girls just don't understand, bless them, is like if you say dress in revealing clothes because you want to attract a particular man, that the blast radius of that signal,
it's a dirty bomb.
Yeah, like I was getting a train recently in London, and there was a schoolgirl who was probably like 16 who was walking ahead of me, and she was going up the stairs, and she was wearing such a short skirt going to school that I could see absolutely everything. And I almost jogged after her just to say, like, you're lucky it was me who was walking behind you. And I know that you're doing this because you want to feel, there is a kind of thrill of feeling sexy that young women experience for the first time, and they have no idea how potent and dangerous that tool is. So, you know, you do it because there's a particular guy who gets the same train as you, who you want to catch his eye or whatever, fine. But like, I could have been a creepy bloke. And this is why I think parents have to be banning their daughters from leaving the house looking like that, basically. Because they have no idea. Like, teenage girls are just, I mean, teenagers are dumb.
The sort of Me Too conversation around victim blaming and stuff is such a deep hole when you get into it, to talk about, should things be this way? No. Are things this way? Yes. Do you want to play within the confines of the thermodynamics of this particular system? Well, you probably should, right? And to thread that needle, especially because I often think about this. Douglas Murray once taught me that it doesn't really matter who makes the best logical argument in a debate. If you manage to get 2 or 3 big laughs, you win.
Yes, that's true.
And it's almost
all vibes.
Yep, it's just vibe. You're a vibe architect, right?
Yeah.
And the problem with this discussion, if you have somebody who is very anti this and is saying that's victim blaming, you saying that you're giving men a pass. You're saying that women should be fearful of what they should wear, and it's like that particular talking point is so empathetically robust in its signaling that it almost always wins.
Yeah.
Because the most obviously caring argument up front that sounds like the one that sounds right, that sounds like the one that you will get the most support for on Twitter, is so tough to play. It's like, right, yeah, no, I don't disagree, but look at the outcomes that we get from this.
One of the things that progressives really have on their side rhetorically is that if you're a conservative who's saying, look, actually, you know, there was a line that one of my readers sent me from all places. It was a book about making wine, and the line was, traditions are experiments that worked. you can say that when you're talking about winemaking and it's not too like politically explosive, but you can obviously apply that to social issues as well.
Perfect.
I know, isn't that a great line?
Experiments that work.
Exactly. But what you end up, if you're trying to make that argument, and if you're proposing anything remotely conservative, is that you end up having to defend other cultures or cultures of the past. So you'll say, look, actually, there was a lot to be said for the sort of slightly arranged marriage. There's a lot to be said for teenage girls being encouraged to dress more modestly, whatever. And people say, oh, what? So you're saying that you support domestic violence. You're saying that you support, cholera and imperialism and like everything that might have happened during the era that you're talking about. And you have to say, no, I don't know. I mean, you just end up at the back foot. Yeah. Whereas if you're a progressive, you can say, I can see this vision, in the future, we'll have this amazing society where everything's great. And the fact that this has never happened and is never likely to happen means that you're never in the position of having to defend anything unfortunate. Yeah. You never have to talk about trade-offs. I think that like acknowledging the existence of trade-offs is a fundamentally conservative trait.
Yeah. Thomas Sowell, there are no solutions, only trade-offs.
Yeah, it's really painful, but it's true, unfortunately.
You'll have seen a lot of the stats coming out about the happiness or lack of amongst young girls. 60% of girls aged 12 to 16 have regular or persistent feelings of hopelessness and stuff like that. What's your assessment of the current mental health of young women?
I mean, it seems to be really bad. There's all the obvious stuff about why, young people, they don't go outside enough, they don't do enough exercise, all that. But that's true for boys as well. I think, Jonathan Haidt's done lots of work on this, that the main thing that's going on for girls is social media, because girls use social media differently from boys. One of the ways that girls use social media is to torture each other, right? Girls are so, that basically all contagious mental illnesses start among and predominate among teenage girls. Things like something like anorexia, for instance, is like a classic example. Or like now, apparently, all these teenage girls have got Tourette's that they've acquired from TikTok.
There was a period where multiple personality disorder and their others were coming out on TikTok too.
Precisely. And I think it's because it's kind of like that witchy thing we were talking about earlier, like women being very, very socially sensitive for obvious evolutionary reasons, that women being smaller, not having the kind of physical capacities that men do, the main advantage you have in terms of your own survival and the survival of your children is making alliances, particularly among other women, recruiting other women to assist you in your endeavours and whatever requires this social sensitivity. And I think that can misfire in terms of, say, being so receptive to whatever, getting Tourette's from TikTok, that you do yourself harm, basically. I mean, it's not terrible harm, but like anorexia is terrible harm, right? That you might acquire sort of mimetically. And I think also it means that girls, I mean, one of the things I always think about Instagram is like it's the image-based social media, which seems to be particularly bad for girls. Twitter is bad for journalists. It sends them completely insane. TikTok and Instagram sends teenage girls insane. I think it's because one of the things that looking at these platforms, one of the things it does to girls is it gives them a completely false impression of their intersexual competition pool. That normally they would look around at the young women they actually know who are as like
plain and normal as them,
skinny and acne ridden as they are, yeah, and think, oh, okay, right, yeah, this is basically my like competition pool for acquiring whichever like equally mediocre looking man, right? Whereas now you look at Instagram and you see the most beautiful women in the world airbrushed and having had plastic surgery, and you think that's your intersexual competition. So I think it just plays complete havoc with their minds. And
this also explains the social contagion theory for F to M transitions.
Yeah.
Because you've heard of the left-handedness argument for trans people, right? That as soon as you remove the societal impositions and judgment, people can truly be their real selves. Yeah. It's like, okay, if that's the case, and that very well may contribute, if that was entirely the case, why is it 4 girls that all sit together at the same lunch table in school?
Right.
Like, why is it not evenly smeared across the entire populace? It's not. It clumps together.
Right.
Right.
It's also gone from being like diagnoses of gender dysphoria have gone from being primarily a male thing to being primarily a female thing, like by a big margin. Like the huge explosion has been among teenage girls specifically.
There was a study in Finland that I found that I put in my newsletter last week that said they could attribute 15% of the negative mental health outcomes of teenage girls to their use of birth control.
Right.
And I realized this when I spoke to Dr. Sarah Hill last year, as she's talking to me about how young forming brains can have particular types of negative mental health outcomes locked in for life if you're on hormonal birth control during this particular period. And I remember thinking about the coddling of the American mind at the time and going, I 100% bet that no one's factored in the base rate of the increase of hormonal birth control and the predisposition that it's caused amongst young girls.
Yeah. I'm sure that that's true. This sounds random, but there's this debate you might be familiar with about whether or not it's ethical to use chemical castration for paedophiles. In some countries they do. So like Germany, I think, is an example of a country that will offer chemical castration as an alternative to prison time. And actually,
it's an alternative.
Yes.
Okay.
Or maybe you have it when you're on parole.
Pretty sure Alan Turing got something
like
similar like that.
Which is one of the reasons why I think it's not popular in the UK, right? Because Turing is a famous example of it being used against gay men.
Yeah.
But a lot of paedophiles will say that they would prefer that and that actually they're really tortured by that. I mean, I am generally of the opinion, I think that this is scientifically sound, that it is an innate sexual orientation that is found in a small number of men.
Yep.
And a lot of them report being absolutely tortured by it. It's awful. It's like the most stigmatized, like you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy. What a horrible curse, right? They would actually choose chemical castration to relieve them of that. And yet there's a general feeling, at least maybe in the Anglosphere, that there's something really dodgy about using sort of pharmacological punishments, right? And you can imagine, of course, using it in other contexts as well. You might sedate, aggressive, whatever. I was talking to a friend about this who works in politics and who's a gay man, and I was saying, well, you could use that the implants you get in your arm, you could use that to sort of release small doses of this every day. And he said, the implants you get in your what? And so, well, you can get hormonal contraception. Either you get it in your arm or you get the intrauterine devices or whatever, which secretes more. He had no idea because he's like innocent to these these matters.
Yeah.
But it occurred to me, like, isn't it crazy that it seems so outside the Overton window to use pharmacology to like alter the minds of criminal offenders. And we've had teenage girls on these drugs for decades. Like, we know them to be mind altering to some extent.
Wow.
And we put like no hesitation about putting an arm implant in like a 15-year-old girl. When it's basically quite an experimental drug. I mean, the argument against is to say, yeah, but pregnancy is also a pretty like
poor outcome for a 15-year-old.
But also quite an extreme thing to go through, full stop, physically, mentally, etc. So if the choice is pregnancy or hormonal birth control, hormonal birth control has fewer side effects.
It's, there are no solutions, only trade-offs, right? And it's rough, man. I think about some of my friends who've got young girls that are, maybe 12 or 13 and are going to be starting to be around boys that can get them pregnant and are going to become sexually active at some point in future, but also know about the risks of hormonal birth control and don't want to condemn their beautiful daughter to a life of potential, 10% more anxiety and depression risk, plus the weight gain and all the rest of the stuff. But also really don't want them to get pregnant at 15. And you go, okay, are you, again, playing within the confines of the world as it is, not as we want it to be, but saying, make sure that you use protection and make sure that you don't get too drunk and blah. It's like they're 15 or 16 or 17 or something, Yeah, you said there about the sexual predisposition or the pedophilia being a sexual orientation. Peter Thiel's got a famous question, which is, what do you believe that most people would disagree with? And for a long time, that was mine, that non-offending pedophiles need way more sympathy than we give them, because I've had a bunch of neuroscientists on the show, and they've put people in fMRIs with arousal responses, and they can show non-offending pedophiles everything. They can throw every sexual kink under the sun at them. Nothing. And then they are able to show them something that tickles their fancy, and
it's really disturbing, isn't it? It would actually be so much more like psychologically reassuring, which is why I think most people prefer this explanation, to think that it's just some manifestation of evil or something, or it's under people's control. Because it's awful to think.
It's so uncomfortable.
Imagine being cursed with that.
Yeah.
Awful.
Yeah. I remember learning about it. I was at uni, and I was dating this girl, a smart doctor, a medical student girl, and she taught me about this. And she'd given a presentation on stage, basically saying, like, we need to give these people more sympathy, because it wasn't that long ago that gay men were seen basically as the same. Now, the difference being that gay men could enact, or not they couldn't, but they were in the right future able to enact it without doing something that was taking advantage of a person that can't consent.
Yeah.
But ever since that, I've always had this in the back of my mind as one of those. And yeah, the discomfort, it was the same reason I think that even before the lab leak hypothesis was something that was put forward, people were so prepared to lay COVID's origins at the feet of a malign scientist, because it was so much more comforting than believing that it was the chance mutation of some silly little microbe. Because or
normal failure.
One at least was just not chaos.
Yeah.
And it felt like it was more in your control. With the right intervention, we could have fixed it.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you can't.
Yeah. Yeah, I read someone, I forget who now, but I read someone writing about Israel. This is relevant, I swear. The failure to the failure of the Gaza borders, and the fact that Hamas were able to get through on 7th of October, and that so many people have assumed that there was some sort of conspiracy at play, that it was either, some faction within the Israeli government or the Americans, or, whatever conspiracy you fancy, for deliberately permitting Hamas to do this in order to justify flattening Gaza, whatever it is. And this writer said, isn't it telling that people will jump to that conclusion rather than the much more likely conclusion, which was normal failure, which is that when you have any kind of complex system, like sometimes
there's a blow-up risk.
Yeah. And that's actually true of everything. Like, what a horrible thought. But that's actually true. Our entire civilization is basically resting on these very, very delicate, complex systems that no one really understands.
Matthew Syed wrote in the Times, the bias is called compensatory control. So when things seem like an outsized blow-up risk has occurred, we want to lay it at a sequence of events that at some point we could have interjected. A compensatory control.
It's almost like magical thinking, isn't it? It's like, praying to the gods to send rain or whatever. It's that feeling of wanting to have some kind of external agent who controls all of this, because it's actually so much worse to think that it's random.
You spoke about intrasexual competition. I've got a pretty spicy theory about body positivity that I want to teach you about. So this is the rivalry theory of body positivity. And the TLDR is, female support for body positivity is at least in part fueled deep down by female intrasexual competition, which pushes other women out of the dating pool by discouraging them from losing weight.
I mean, yes, but I also think to some extent it's just cope. It's just trying to... It's just because sexual attractiveness is like brutally hierarchical. It just is, for like men and for women. I mean, for women it's more physical, for men it's more to status and whatever, but it is just brutally hierarchical. And no one, particularly if you have a generally egalitarian outlook, if you're on the left, no one wants to face up to that, particularly if you're at the bottom of the hierarchy. And so trying to say, oh no, the hierarchy doesn't exist actually, and trying to persuade men to agree with you is one way.
Good luck with that.
Well, exactly. But it is one thing that you can do. You probably can't persuade men to think differently, but you can, I don't know, get into like Lululemon ads or
well,
something
no one's ever been guilted into an erection, I don't think.
It doesn't work.
No. Well, you could try harder.
But this whole, I mean, like there's also a deeper principle there, isn't there? That like human nature is kind of immovable. Yeah. Not completely. Like we do have a little bit of control over ourselves, and there are cultural structures that will incentivize some things and not others, and whatever. There is room for maneuver, but we basically have some fairly tight controls around us at all times.
Well, it's what I've got in my head is kind of human nature is easier to constrain than it is to enable in that regard. Like it's already operating at max RPM, and you can bring that down with social norms and judgment and stuff. But going the whole argument of a M to F transition, if you as a straight man are not attracted to that person, regardless of how they present, that's homophobia or transphobia or whatever. I actually don't know which of those two it is. It just doesn't play within the confines of reality.
Yeah.
Right.
And actually, that's one of the things that I think is so cruel about so much of the sort of discourse around trans. Like, there's this line, actually, there's this great, there's a writer called Andrew Long Chu, who is trans and who disagrees with me on absolutely everything, but I would say he's a great writer, right? Really, really good prose. And Chu has this line: when you are trans, you become permanently dependent on the kindness of strangers, in the sense that basically no one passes. It's really hard to pass convincingly, particularly if you transition as an adult. It'll always be kind of physically obvious that you're not actually a natal female. What you depend on is people playing along every single time, every social interaction for the rest of your life, so as not to feel dysphoria. And sometimes people won't do that. Little children aren't going to do that. Or like some elderly person with Alzheimer's isn't going to do that. You know, people aren't always going to cotton on that they're supposed to play along. Yeah. And so it means you have this incredibly fragile...
Yeah, it's a social minefield.
It's terrible. Yeah, and what you're basically... And that's what's being inflicted on people when they're encouraged to go through irreversible surgeries, living their entire life dependent on the kindness of strangers for like to avoid complete psychological dissolution.
Douglas Murray's got this quote that he throws around saying, you know when you've reached true equality because you have to put up with the same level of shit that everybody else does.
That's true, yes.
And the lack of special dispensation is the exact opposite. And, you know, I think it's all about dispositions, but I think if it was me and I was being coddled, I would feel incredibly patronized. And this is how I think, you know, to even put, regardless of whether the L's, the G's, the B's, the T's as groups want to be together, it's not like T is just a group or G is just a group, right? Within that, you have a number of different factions of people. And I don't think that, that wouldn't be how I would want to be treated. What's your theory on the normalization of cosmetic surgery?
I think that unlike other industries, which are more obviously supply, demand led, whatever, I think that there is a completely bottomless desire from women in particular for beauty enhancing treatment. And they will basically spend as much money as they can, right, on average. And that the thing that really drives the beauty industry is technological innovation. So like as soon as something new comes on the market, and it's typically very expensive, and then only celebrities use it and it trickles down, whatever. Like, I didn't know this, for instance. It wasn't that long ago that actually dyeing your hair was considered to be quite unusual for women who were going grey. That was considered to be kind of in the realms of like quite, not extreme, but like quite, expensive, time consuming, whatever. Like it was at the edges of what was considered normal for women, say in their 50s or 60s. Now everyone dyes their hair. Basically, now going grey is a weird statement. And we've had this like ratcheting up of the things that you have to do in order to be considered well-groomed. And the sky is the limit. And so it's, and it's just driven by what's available. So now it's not just wearing makeup. It's also fillers, it's also Botox, it's also weird, wonderful facials, whatever, like all the things that you can do having your nails done as like as a completely standard thing, right? It's really expensive to have like perfectly manicured nails all the time. And women who don't have much money will spend so much money on this. It's amazing. And I mean, what a wonderful time to have invested in the beauty industry. Because honestly, the tech that they do is actually incredible.
What do you mean? What like?
Like, okay, nails, one example. Men won't know this. The bottles of nail varnish that you can get in the pharmacy for like a few pounds, the manicure will look really bad and it will last you a few days. So presumably back in the 50s, women used to do that, but no one does that now. Maybe 10 years ago, it started to become possible to get manicures that would last for 10 days. But they're quite bad for your nails because they have to like saw away at it basically when they remove it. But yeah, it's not very nice and it doesn't feel very nice. So you don't necessarily want to do that. Now you can get nail varnish which lasts you a month and it's more expensive and yada yada. But like the technological breakthroughs, Peter Thiel is always talking about like technological stagnation, right? Like we haven't improved on the jet engine and whatever. We have improved so much on beauty tech in that period. It's amazing. And I think it's just because there's a bottomless market for it. People don't actually care about flying across the Atlantic slightly more quickly. You know, that's why
they want nail varnish that lasts for another 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. And fillers that look more natural and never to get wrinkles and yada, yada, yada. Like.
Right. So it's a race. It's not only a race to the bottom, which women have an endless desire for, how much enhancement they will go for. The minimum bar, like the Overton window, the minimum base rate of that has also been raised up.
And it's because of intersexual competition. It's because now if you only did the beauty routine of 40 years ago, you would look relatively bad compared to the other women in your peer group.
This is precisely the same, but not disincentivized. Instead, it's just an unspoken about cartel across the board as why women slut shame more than men. It's a price enforcement mechanism.
Yeah.
But instead of it being price enforcement, it's just competition.
Yeah.
But that is related to the female rivalry theory of body positivity, right? That if you can somehow manage to get a few competitors
down,
to eat their way out of your horizontal competition league. There's this Bill Burr bit. He's live at Red Rocks, some theatre, and he says, if you ladies could only support the WNBA like you support a fat chick that keeps on gaining weight and is no longer a threat to you, they'd be doing more numbers than the NBA.
It is amazing whenever you go and women post selfies for other women.
Yeah.
Because you look at the comments underneath any woman who's posted a selfie ever, and it will always be like, baby look amazing, baby look amazing. And the expectation, I think, is that then when those women post selfies, they get the same thing back. And it's all very kind of, you know, like it's funny, like this is the nature of sort of human instinct, right? You'll do things with having no idea why you're doing them. And then sometimes you'll look back and be like, oh, okay. Like you read David Buss or something. I'm sure you've had this experience and you're like, oh yeah,
that's me.
I've done that.
There I am.
And you'll keep doing it anyway.
Well, think about why women buy luxury goods. Like, why is it that women are so concerned about having a YSL purse?
It's for the girls and the gays.
Or
it's not for men.
A Mulberry handbag.
Yeah.
So there was a really interesting study that I looked at that showed the gift that highly intersexually competitive women with wealthy spouses wanted the most was a gift card to an expensive department store.
So they could choose it themselves.
Precisely correct. Because they want to use the signal of my mate is so invested. Oh, you want to go after my mate?
Yes, yes, yes.
He spent $5,000 on this tiny piece of leather that I carry my phone in. He spent $10,000 on this wedding ring or whatever. Right? It's an intersexually competitive threat display of mate investment. Even when the mate's not around.
Yeah. And because men are completely insensitive to, they don't
totally
care about
oblivious.
the brands.
You think we know the difference between a fucking Mulberry handbag and something from like Primark?
I don't think men notice things like manicures either. I think a lot of the beauty stuff, like some of it, yes, is orientated towards looking younger. You know, that's always going to be sexually attractive. But I think a lot of the looking really well groomed is about signaling to girls and gays because they're the ones who are actually receiving the signals.
Did you see my post, that study that was floating around last week to do with that hairdressing experiment that had been done. This is phenomenal. So this is where I originally justified using science, my rivalry theory of female body positivity support. A recent study published in Personality and Individual Differences found that women who are high in intrasexual competitiveness are more likely to advise women who they perceive as potential mating threats to cut off more hair in an attempt to sabotage their attractiveness. The researchers studied 450 women who were presented with hypothetical salon clients. Participants were asked to recommend the amount of hair to be cut off for each woman. Women who reported high levels of intrasexual competitiveness were more likely to recommend that clients have more hair cut off when the hair was in good condition and the clients expressed a preference for minimal cutting. Another finding is that women advise clients of similar attractiveness as themselves to cut off the most hair. Participants effectively targeted women they perceived as being on the same attractiveness level, potentially to try and reduce their attractiveness. Longer hair is a cue to youth and health.
Yeah, men love long hair. Like, I don't think women realize how much men love long hair. Like, if you read men are actually incredibly easy to please, right, in terms of like physical cues. But the problem is that there are two parallel status games going on when it comes to female beauty and appearance. One is attracting men, which is basically just looking youthful, like fine and fertile. And then the other is the much more difficult game, which is the intersexual competition game, which is about making yourself look high status in other ways. And that's where the brands come in. That's where, like keeping up with fashion comes in. Men don't care about that. But you have those two things going on in parallel, and occasionally they'll come into tension. Occasionally there'll be some trend.
There are no solutions, only trade-off.
Which makes you fashionable, but the men don't like.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, like short hair would be an example of that, although it's quite rare for that to be really popular. But I don't know, like baggy clothes or something like that.
I was going to say like boyfriend jeans and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Men aren't going to be interested in that. But that might like occasionally come around.
Guys would be happy with girls just permanently wearing leggings. Like hot leggings, like Gymshark leggings or something. Like just go out in those with heels.
Yeah, like it's very basic.
Yeah.
But then I mean, also part of what's driving fashion is the fact that gay men are so overwhelmingly overrepresented in fashion. And they don't
have absolutely no interest.
No. So that's why you have like really skinny women on catwalks and stuff. Like it's partly because the clothes kind of hang, it's easier if everyone's a small sample size to deal with the clothes, like fitting everyone. But I think it's also because the more androgynous look is just considered to be more beautiful by gay men.
You see that Victoria's Secrets have made the radical decision to go back to using hot models. They tried 300-pound mannequins. They tried a trans person. They tried a man. They tried the captain of the US soccer team. And radically now they're just going to use hot chicks.
You know the gym brand Lululemon, like expensive gym wear. I can't tell you how much Lululemon I own. It's disgusting anyway. They used to have a rule that they didn't even stock sizes over like a UK size 12. Or UK 14. Like the average woman is a 16.
That's a smarter version of what Abercrombie and Fitch did, where they wouldn't give away their clothes to homeless people. They'd just burn them.
Yeah.
We don't even give them away to acceptable customers, let alone once they
No, I really think that Lululemon, and actually the guy who founded it would say quite straightforwardly, like, I don't want fat chicks wearing my clothes, basically. Like they knew that having it being associated with skinny women was aspirational, but then they changed that in like 2020-ish because
couldn't survive.
And now they have loads of plus size models and stuff. It's a fashion though; it won't last.
Louise Perry, ladies and gentlemen. Louise, I love you. I really, really enjoy bringing you on. Your podcast's great. Your writing's great. Where should people go if they want to watch the stuff that you're doing?
So my podcast is called Maiden Mother Matriarch. It's on YouTube, Substack, all the places you get your podcasts. My first book was The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, which came out last year. I'm working on another one as well, which is going to be out in about 18 months, which is on motherhood, fertility, birth rates, all of this stuff. I just write. I work too much. I write for too many places, like countless places. I'm on Twitter.
Everyone should go and read The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. It's phenomenal, and I'm excited to see what you do with your next one. Thank you for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you enjoyed that episode, you will love my full-length 2-hour-long podcast with Douglas Murray. Go on. Press it.